The phone call came at 2 a.m. Vincent "Vinny" Romano, owner of the Blue Moon nightclub in Chicago, jolted awake to a voice that made his blood run cold. "Cancel Sinatra's show tomorrow night, or we cancel you permanently." The line went dead. Vinny sat in his dark bedroom, hands shaking, knowing that Frank Sinatra was scheduled to perform in 18 hours. And knowing that the Torino crime family didn't make empty threats. But what Vinny didn't know was that Frank Sinatra had received a similar call 30 minutes earlier. And Frank's response would become the most courageous performance of his career. Because sometimes standing up to evil isn't about being fearless. Sometimes it's about being terrified and doing the right thing anyway. If you love discovering the untold stories behind music history's most incredible moments, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. December 8th, 1962. Chicago, Illinois, the Blue Moon nightclub. Vinny Romano paced his small office above the club, cigarette burning down to his fingers. The Blue Moon was everything to him. His life's work, his family's future, the dream he'd built from nothing. His father had been a laborer on the South Side. Vinny had scraped and saved for 15 years to buy this place, transform it from a dive bar into Chicago's premier jazz venue. The club was small, intimate, only 300 seats. But Vinny had booked the biggest names in music: Ella Fitzgerald, Count Basie, Tony Bennett. And now Frank Sinatra, the chairman of the board himself, was supposed to perform tonight. Sold out for weeks. People had driven from Detroit, Milwaukee, even New York, to see Frank at the Blue Moon. But now the Torinos wanted the club. They'd been pressuring Vinny for months to sell. When he refused, the pressure turned to threats. When he still refused, they'd escalated to violence. Last week, they'd beaten up his bartender. Yesterday, they'd smashed the front windows. And now, this ultimatum: cancel Frank or die. Vinny's hands trembled as he poured himself a scotch. He could call Frank, cancel the show, claim illness or technical problems. Frank would understand. But Vinny knew what canceling meant. It meant surrender. It meant the Torinos owned him. And once they owned the Blue Moon, they'd turn it into a front for their drug operation, their gambling, their violence. Everything Vinny had worked for would become everything he stood against. His wife, Maria, appeared in the doorway. She'd been crying. "Vinny, call Frank. Cancel the show. Please." "Maria, I don't care about the money. I don't care about the club. I care about you coming home alive." Vinny looked at his wife, the woman who'd believed in his dream when everyone else said he was crazy. She'd worked double shifts as a nurse to help him buy this place. She deserved better than to watch her husband choose between his principles and his life. "If I cancel," Vinny said quietly, "they win. And if they win here, what's next? Tommy's your restaurant? Joe's barbershop? Do we just let them take everything?" "Vinny, you're not responsible for the whole neighborhood." "Maybe not, but I'm responsible for this place. And Frank's counting on me." What Vinny didn't know was that Frank Sinatra was having his own crisis 3 miles away at the Palmer House Hotel. Frank had received his warning call around 1:30 a.m. The voice had been polite, almost friendly. "Mr. Sinatra, we strongly advise you to cancel your performance at the Blue Moon tonight. This is for your own safety." Frank's first instinct was rage. Nobody told Frank Sinatra where he could or couldn't perform. Nobody threatened him. But then, reality set in. The Chicago mob wasn't some group of small-time hustlers. These were serious people who'd killed for much less than defying their orders. Frank's manager, Hank Sauer, was pacing the hotel suite, practically pulling his hair out. "Frank, you gotta cancel. This isn't about pride. This is about staying alive." "I don't cancel shows, Hank." "You do when the alternative is a bullet." Frank stood at the window, looking out at the Chicago skyline. He'd grown up with guys like the Torinos. Hoboken was full of them in the old days. Men who took what they wanted through fear and violence. Frank had seen what happened to neighborhoods when the mob moved in. Good people lost their businesses, their homes, their hope. But there was something else. Frank had met Vinny Romano 6 months ago when they'd booked this show. Vinny wasn't just another club owner looking to make a quick buck. He was a dreamer, a builder, a man trying to create something beautiful in a world full of ugliness. If Frank abandoned Vinny now, he'd be abandoning everything he believed about loyalty, about standing up for the little guy, about using his success to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. "Hank, call Vinny. Tell him the show goes on." "Frank, are you insane?" "Maybe, but I'm not a coward." By 6 p.m., word had spread through Chicago's underworld. Frank Sinatra was defying the Torinos. Some said he was brave. Others said he was dead. At the Blue Moon, Vinny tried to convince his staff to go home. Most refused. "Mr. Romano," said Jackie, the head waiter, "my family's worked in this neighborhood for 30 years. I ain't running from these punks." The musicians, local guys who played backup for touring acts, also stayed. "Frank Sinatra's performing here tonight," said Tommy, the piano player. "Ain't nothing gonna stop that." But the customers, that was different. Word of the threats had leaked. By 7 p.m., half the audience had called to cancel their reservations. The sold-out crowd of 300 had dwindled to maybe 150. The people who remained weren't just Frank Sinatra fans. They were people making a statement. Business owners, teachers, cops, firefighters, people who refused to be intimidated. At 8:45 p.m., a black Cadillac pulled up outside the Blue Moon. 3 men in expensive suits got out. Even from the second-floor window, Vinny recognized them. Angelo Torino, the family's enforcer, and 2 of his lieutenants. They weren't hiding. They wanted to be seen. They wanted everyone to know they were watching, waiting, ready to make good on their threats. Vinny's heart was pounding as he walked downstairs to the main floor. The remaining audience sat quietly, tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Everyone knew what was at stake. At exactly 9 p.m., the side door opened, and Frank Sinatra walked in. He wasn't hiding either. Frank strolled through the club like he owned the place, nodding to customers, shaking hands, acting like this was just another show in just another venue. But Vinny could see the steel in Frank's eyes, the set of his jaw that said he'd made his decision and wasn't backing down. Frank climbed onto the small stage and looked out at the crowd. 150 people who'd chosen courage over safety. Frank respected that. Hell, he was inspired by it. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," Frank said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent room. "Welcome to the Blue Moon. I want to thank Vinny Romano for having me here tonight." Frank paused, his eyes finding Vinny at the bar. "Vinny's got something special here. A place where music matters, where people matter, where nobody, and I mean nobody, gets to tell you what you can or can't do." The audience understood. Frank wasn't just talking about music. He was talking about freedom, about dignity, about refusing to bow down to bullies. "This first song," Frank said, "is for everyone who's ever been told they can't do something, can't go somewhere, can't stand up for what's right." Frank signaled the band, and they began playing My Way. But halfway through the first verse, the front door opened. Angelo Torino walked in, flanked by his two men. They didn't sit down, didn't order drinks. They just stood there, a visible threat, letting everyone know they were watching. Frank saw them immediately. For just a moment, his voice faltered, not from fear, but from the weight of the moment. He was literally singing My Way while staring down men who'd kill him for doing exactly that. But Frank didn't stop. If anything, his voice got stronger. "And now, the end is near, and so I face the final curtain." The words took on new meaning in that room. This could be the end. For Frank, for Vinny, for anyone who'd chosen to be here tonight. "My friend, I'll say it clear. I'll state my case, of which I'm certain." Frank looked directly at Angelo Torino as he sang those words. The message was unmistakable. I'm not backing down. I'm stating my case. I'm doing this my way. The audience was mesmerized. They were watching Frank Sinatra literally risk his life to sing a song about refusing to compromise your principles. When Frank got to the chorus, "I did it my way," the entire room erupted, not in casual applause, but in defiant celebration. These 150 people were standing up to the mob through Frank's music, finding their own courage in his refusal to submit. Angelo Torino's face darkened. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Frank was supposed to cancel, or if he didn't cancel, he was supposed to be too terrified to perform well. Instead, Frank was giving the performance of his life, and the crowd was eating it up. For the next hour, Frank performed with an intensity that shocked even him. He sang Chicago, turning the city's anthem into a declaration of love for people who stood up to bullies. He sang Come Fly With Me, making it sound like an invitation to rise above small-minded threats. He sang The Way You Look Tonight, dedicating it to Maria Romano, making her cry with its beauty. But it was during That's Life that something extraordinary happened. Frank was midway through the song when Angelo Torino started walking toward the stage. The room went dead silent. Everyone understood what was happening. The threats were over. Now came the action. Frank saw Angelo approaching, but he didn't stop singing. He didn't run, didn't call for security. He stood his ground and kept performing. That's life. That's what all the people say, Frank sang, looking Angelo straight in the eye. Angelo stopped 3 feet from the stage, close enough to touch Frank, close enough to end everything. "You're riding high in April, shot down in May," Frank continued, his voice never wavering. For a moment that felt like eternity, the two men stared at each other. Angelo's hand moved toward his jacket. The audience held its breath. Then something unexpected happened. From the back of the room, Vinny Romano stood up. "This is my place," Vinny said, his voice carrying through the silent club. "And Frank Sinatra is my guest. You want him? You go through me first." One by one, other people in the audience stood up. Jackie the waiter, Tommy the piano player, regular customers who'd been coming to the Blue Moon for years. They weren't fighters, weren't tough guys. They were ordinary people who'd found extraordinary courage. Angelo looked around the room at 150 people on their feet, staring him down. He'd come to intimidate one man and found himself facing an entire community. Frank, still singing, gave Angelo a slight nod. Not mocking, not aggressive, just acknowledgement. One man recognizing another's position while refusing to yield his own. Angelo Torino, enforcer for one of Chicago's most feared crime families, turned and walked out of the Blue Moon nightclub. When Frank finished, "That's life," the audience exploded. They'd witnessed something that would become legend in Chicago. The night Frank Sinatra stared down the mob and won. After the show, Vinny found Frank backstage. "I don't know how to thank you." Frank lit a cigarette, his hands finally showing the slightest tremor. "You don't need to thank me, Vinny. You stood up for your place. That took guts." "You think they'll come back?" Frank considered this. "Maybe. But tonight, you showed them something. You showed them this neighborhood won't be pushed around. Sometimes that's enough." Frank was right. The Torinos never came back to the Blue Moon. Word spread through the underworld about what had happened, how Frank Sinatra and a room full of regular people had faced them down. It became a cautionary tale about picking the wrong fights. The Blue Moon thrived for another 30 years. Vinny Romano booked the biggest names in music, turned his small club into a Chicago institution. When he retired in 1995, he sold the place to his nephew with one condition: a photo from that December night in 1962 had to remain hanging behind the bar. The photo shows Frank on stage, microphone in hand, with Angelo Torino clearly visible in the foreground. But the most powerful part of the image is the audience, 150 ordinary people standing up to extraordinary evil. Frank never spoke publicly about that night, but in his 1986 autobiography, he wrote, "Sometimes you have to decide what kind of man you want to be. I decided I wanted to be the kind of man who doesn't run when bullies show up." Vinny Romano and his customers made the same decision. We all went home that night knowing we'd done the right thing. Today, the site of the Blue Moon is a community center serving Chicago's South Side. On the wall hangs a plaque in memory of all who stand up to fear with courage, and to Frank Sinatra, who showed us how. If this story moved you, subscribe and hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to know that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right despite the fear. Sometimes standing up to bullies is the most important song you'll ever sing. Have you ever had to stand up to someone trying to intimidate you? Let us know in the comments how you found the courage to do what's right when it wasn't easy.